Welcome to Curious Coaching, the Sport Northern Ireland podcast for coaches who are driven to explore new ways, thirsty for new ideas, and passionately curious about how they can maximise the power of sport through great coaching. The podcast that seeks not to answer coaching questions, but to provoke them.
Welcome to the Curious Coaching Podcast with your hosts, myself, Michael Cook, and my colleague, Simon Toole. Today on the podcast, we have Stephen Maguire. If you don't know Stephen, he's a Strabane native and also one of the most successful high-performance coaches ever to come out of Northern Ireland. Firstly, working with fantastic athlete Jason Smith, who had taken many medals at the Paralympics and Para World Championships. He's went on to work with in a role with Scottish athletics, as well as working with the high-performance athletes in the British athletics programme. We're delighted to have Stephen on with us today. He offers an amazing insight into coaching, his journey, and his thoughts around environment and culture. We're delighted to have him with us today. I hope you're going to enjoy listening to the Curious Coaching Podcast.
Okay, Stephen, you're really welcome to the Curious Coaching Club. We're really excited to have you here today for a bit of a chat about your coaching.
I'm very pleased to be here. So, I'm looking forward to it as well. I love chatting.
Good stuff. So, Stephen, I know I first became familiar with you of some of the work you were doing with Jason Smith at home here. Now you're working with Scottish athletics. I know you've been to British athletics in the meantime. Can you talk us through, I suppose, how you got into coaching in the first place and a little bit about that journey to where you've ended up at the minute?
Probably the first thing I would say, it's not planned. Nothing. I don't think anything that I did was planned. And I was extremely lucky at all stages that, I was always surrounded by very good athletes who wanted to learn, who wanted to develop, and who wanted, they themselves were curious and how can they be better, So I probably, I was probably coaching when I was about 15, 16, 17 years of age, and I didn't realize it. I was always coaching within the club. I was extremely lucky that I was in Strabane Athletic Club, and we had some, athletes in there who were also very good coaches, some real good role models, Jim Colgan, Mickey Joe Doherty, who had, won national titles at home and things like that. So they would have been my first sort of coaching influences. And that club setting that we had got, and the environment that we had created in Strabane way back, I don't know what, late 70s, early 80s and stuff like that, when things were a bit crazy about the town and stuff like that, there was an athletic club that were kind of oblivious to all the madness, and some of the sort of the hurt that was going on as well. But I was very lucky in that I had people who read a lot, who people studied a lot. It was religious for us all to buy Athletics Weekly and figure out what was going on and look at the trends and things like that and compare us to where we're at. So, it was a group of, jumpers really. So I was a long jumper and triple jumper, and probably, fortunate in one way, a little bit unfortunate the other. I got injured very early and sort of my career. I was only in the sport maybe 2 or 3 years when I started picking up big serious injuries, and so I look back now and you kind of, the competitive nature of anybody never leaves you, does it? Whether you're an athlete or a coach. So, there's a friend of ours, he's very well known. He's an athletics historian, a guy called Pierce O'Callaghan, and he started a website or a Facebook page, and it's Irish Athletics, and there's one now in Strabane Athletics as well. And I just look back at them and I look at Irish titles when I was out hurt and stuff like that I'm thinking, bloody hell, I could have won that or could have done whatever, but maybe you wouldn't, but it's good dreaming anyway. But through that period of time, it enabled me to coach and enabled me to learn and to figure things out and stuff like that. So I was always very, very curious how people moved. And, being a jumper and stuff like that, it was actually quite complicated, long jump and triple jump and stuff like that. So I suppose the guys being where they were at and what they were doing, they were interested in reading and comparing, and historically they would have known everything that happened in Olympic Games and stuff like that. So we're always comparing about that. So that was my first initial grounding, and being injured so much meant that I sort of did all my coaching stuff very, very early, and I was probably a level 3 coach at 17 or 18 years of age type thing. It was just this thirst to learn and stuff like that. so that was my first influences. And as I went through things, then, you know, the early injuries manifested itself that I was actually probably in the early stages of quite a severe illness. So I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and you know, that would have been the reason that my body was breaking down and stuff like that. I'd thrown myself into work, left the sport a little bit when I wasn't able to do anything, thrown myself into work, and then I was very lucky one day when I was mid to late 20s, I would imagine. I was newly married, and an athlete called Shauna Carlin from Lifford knocked the door and asked me to have a look at her long jumping. And her coach, again, a very successful and a very well-respected coach from this area, Ben O'Donnell, had unfortunately passed away, and Shauna was left without a coach. So she had heard that I used to be a decent athlete and would have a look at her, and that's how it all started again, you know. So started working with Shauna, developed groups of athletes, very successful at national level, but no real ambitions, you know, to be that, you know, to be a coach at national level or international level or anything like that. But it just progresses. And then through Shauna, then Jason came along one day, and I have to be honest, you know, she was the person who told me that he was actually good. You know, he was just part of the training group at that stage. So he wandered along. He was, I think it was the similar name to I was Miss Maguire, was Limavady Grammar School, and she told him to come to the athletic club. So two Maguires getting together and working with Jason. So Jason was, 15, 16, 17 years of age, something like that, probably 16. And yeah, and that's where things started to take off. And, you know, being the vigilant coach that I was, I think it took me 6 months to realize that he was visually impaired. I didn't even recognize that, you know, I just treated him as one of the athletes. So yeah, that's how Jason came along, you know. So, but plenty of learning, plenty of, you know, just as the title of your podcast, curiosity, you know, it was one of the things that always, as I said, I was interested in movement, but I was also very interested in what was in front of you. You know, how can you coach what was in front of you, you know? So things were never in a box, or, you know, there was never this perfect formula in my world, you know, of how to work things out. And Jason was, he was a good example of that, because, you know, once we discovered that he was visually impaired, and made sure that, and he himself didn't tell us either, by the way, it just wasn't my stupidity. He didn't tell us, you know, and his dad, Lloyd, had said about the impairment, but he was very good. Like most people with disabilities, he was able to good at hiding things. So he always stuck in the back of the group and never put himself forward and things like that. But yeah, what a talent, you know. And as I said at the start, very lucky to have Shauna and to Jason and various athletes like that I was able to learn my trade with, you know.
And how have you found then, Stephen? Because a lot of that sounds like it's sort of driven small groups, informal, accidental things that sort of come along. How did you find it then moving into an organisation where things might be formalised a little bit more, whether it was a British Athletics or whether it's with your role with Scottish Athletics now?
Do you know what? I was very, very lucky that, you know, Jason had a ton of success, as we know, and you know, when we'd got to a stage where Shauna was coming near the end of her career and she'd won numerous national titles, and, you know, there was others in the group. Gavin Norris from Derry, I can remember as well, very good sprinter, you know, and various people in there, and Anna Boyle at a time and stuff like that. So, you know, the group was very good, but as Jason was transitioning, I needed to realize very quickly that what we had up in Templemore, what we had up in the Northwest, you know, we tried to get various athletes up to train with him, and, you know, to develop and things like that. And we had a couple of hours journey up to Sinai and Jordanstown and things like that, you know, once he was starting to be established, and certainly in mainstream and Paralympic end, that I had to try and figure out how was I going to bring him to the next level, because I knew I wasn't going to be able to do it in Derry or Strabane. You know, that was almost impossible, you know. And people were as good as gold to us, you know, the Derry City Council and Strabane Council and that, for letting us the use of facilities and things like that. But we had no training group. The weather wasn't great, obviously, and we had no indoor facilities, you know. So, you know, Jason was contracted to a shoe company at that stage, and he was getting kit and things like that. So I contacted them, and I was put in contact with Lance Browman. And basically, I wanted to try and figure out what was going on. And Lance was an elite sprints coach, and, you know, he was contracted by Adidas. So I contacted Lance, me being me, within a year, Jason and I were in the track in Claremont with him, and I think that's where my coach education really started. At that stage we were surrounded by, I think it was in the group, but the time it evolved, and at the early stages, if there was just a couple of people, but in a professional sprints group, there was five of the athletes, men, who had run under 10 seconds, and there was 2 of the women who'd run under 11, and they were all, it was about podiums, and it was about Olympics, and it was about worlds. So it changed the way that we looked at life, really. Jason and I based ourselves in Florida for on and off probably 4 years, and we surrounded ourselves in that environment and culture and everything like that. So to me, the natural progression was then to, as my wife said, look for a proper job, and I went to Scotland for the first time as head coach with Scotland, just probably after London. Yeah, it was after London in 2012, and I had 2 years to prepare a team for the Commonwealth Games, pretty much working with an individual, and then going into a sort of governing body as head coach was a challenge. And working with the coaches, working with the athletes, primarily with the coaches, was interesting, but we were very successful, and things worked. Halfway through that period, I was approached by Neil Black from British Athletics, would have come down as head of sprints, and I turned it down a couple of times, and then I couldn't then. So he offered me a position that I thought, you know what, if I don't do this, I'll always regret it. So trundled off then to British Athletics, thinking I was this guru. I was get hit between the eyes then with the size of the business, the size of British Athletics, and just the enormity of talent. So it was a bit of a roller coaster of learning, awareness, but bringing it back to fundamentals of what's in front of you and how do you deal with it.
Oh, brilliant, Stephen. I have some questions to ask you on the back of that around your curiosity, but I'm going to sort of sidestep nearly and hand over to Michael to talk about that learning, because you've just given us too good an invitation not to take you up on at this stage.
Yeah, I think you've actually answered maybe some of this already, but on this podcast, coach learning is one of the major themes. Can you tell us about the most significant learning experience that you've had to date?
Oh, gee. I can give you 2. One of them's not too good, and I'll give you one. The first one was working with Jason, who's visually impaired. Communication was key, and I would advise any coach to work with an athlete, with a disability or on the Paralympic end, because your communication has to be so good. Jason was an incredibly talented and very bright athlete, but obviously he couldn't see technique, and obviously he couldn't replicate that easily, and we were very lucky that, the Sports Institute in Belfast, for example, were able to get us a big TV. Now, arrogantly, we thought that was for us just, so we claimed it and we used it when we were working on his technique and things like that. But communication and developing that awareness with Jason and the feeling. So we worked a lot on Jason's feeling, how things felt, rather than a visual cue, if that makes sense. So, we weren't able to look at things that well and say, how does that? So we worked a lot on his feeling and how of his awareness of technique. So certainly that, from a coaching point of view, was huge. Huge learning then was in 2016, jumping forward, when this was quite catastrophic, and it always hurts me to talk about it, but it's massive learning for me and hopefully for others, that within the GB teams, we had developed a really good relay program, and the guys in particular, we were really striving on stuff. So the anniversary games, the big London event was just before the Olympics in Rio. So we ran 2 different teams in the 4x1 men, and we went into the Olympics ranked number 1 and number 2 in the world with different teams, which was unheard of. And but we wanted it way too much, and we all got emotionally attached to things way too much. And when you have that desire that that you can do it, but we probably, I'm using we instead of me, but I in particular wasn't, as the head coach of the team, would you call it experience or nous? Probably experience, where I hadn't been in that situation before in Olympics, when you were looking after a squad of people that were actually favourites for a medal. Not necessarily to win it at that stage, because you were always up against USA and Jamaica. But, you know, we went into those games really thinking that we could do things, but wanting it too much. We got Lane 1 in the semi-final, which was catastrophic. And we also got a loaded heat. I personally made too much of a deal about it. Because we thought this was going to be our time, it was going to be there, to grab the medal. Obviously knew that we would have to work incredibly hard, surrounded by incredibly good athletes, but I got completely wrong where I was devastated when we got Lane 1. And I remember the team talk to this day, which was about negativity and, oh, well, we're screwed and we need to complain, we need to make a protest, we need to do this. Disaster. And we just knew that, that the heat that we had got, even from Lane 1, given the quality of what we had, the athletes probably should have been good enough to do it if I had created the right environment. And I created a negative environment. Now, we made the final as a fastest loser, so we were hanging on to things again. So, in athletics, you get, fastest losers are Lane 1 and Lane 2. And Lane 2, you have a chance. Lane 1, you have no chance, particularly in a 4x1. And so we were praying, absolutely praying that we would get Lane 2 in the final. No, we got Lane 1 again, so there was more desperation, but we didn't get a medal. The boys ran brilliantly, and actually, in fact, at that stage, I'm not too sure if it's been beaten, but they ran the fastest ever time from Lane 1 ever in the world. So it was a magnificent performance, but my God, I blew that one. It took me to Christmas to get over it, without an exaggeration. I remember sitting with Neil and trying to figure out how the hell did that happen, but you learn from it massively, and I can assure you it'll not happen again, but it was a real tough lesson.
I can absolutely imagine. And the aftermath of that, you talked about being devastated for a long time. What was the reflective process like during that, and how did you get through that?
I took everything on my shoulders. I took full responsibility for stuff. The reflection being that we weren't aware enough as a team, we weren't savvy enough as a team. We emotionally were too attached to the decisions. We wanted it too much. I remember Neil and I went across to Jamaica to meet Zarnell Hughes, and Glenn Mills, the very famous coach who coached Usain Bolt, coached Zarnell. This was in the November, and it really hit home. And he certainly knew the buttons to press. And he says to me, Stephen, he says, how can two teams going into the Olympic Games ranked number 1 and 2 and you can't come away with a medal? What happened, And it was just that point there where you go, flipping hell. Why did you have to be so pointed and direct and honest, But the reflection was that we need to widen things out. The reflection was that we needed to create an environment and a culture that the process and the journey of what we needed to do, it sounds cliched, but was so important, that it didn't matter what lane you got, didn't matter if the sky fell in, the track got flooded, that we were still able to go and get our job done. So I think at that stage we changed a lot of stuff. So actually a girl from County Down, Jen Savage, got involved. Jen was in the peripheral of things, but she was very much part of British athletics, but we really ingrained Jen into the whole fabric of the relays and the sprints and everything like that. We started to be even more precise on jobs, so and our communication again being very precise, and extended the team really. So we kept a very tight team. So with technical leads in both 4x1s and 4x4s, but really drove in and dug into what each job was and the responsibilities and everybody's responsibility. My responsibility as head coach was to create an environment that no matter what was thrown at us, we were able to cope with. So we started doing a lot of team building, a lot of robustness, and very much realizing it just wasn't about the physical end of things. You could be as fast as you like, but if the environment isn't right, you're not going to succeed, or if the environment can be chipped at. And as we've seen, as we've moved now up to 2020, where that men's team now are very accountable. They know exactly what they need to do to win, and they've been world champions in 17. Took a USA record to beat them last year. So very much evolved into things, but huge learnings. But the reflective process would have been, where I suppose each one of us had a specific job to do to create the robustness of athlete and staff, and to really engage and test that all the time, testing how good we were under pressure. So adding all that to it, yeah, we've learned a lot.
Fantastic. And obviously the success that you've had in later years, I would imagine that learning played a role in helping you design the programs and design the environments that allowed for that success.
Yeah, huge learning, totally uncomfortable as well. It was absolutely difficult. The Olympic environment, and I'm massively privileged to have done a numerous amount of Olympic Games, but, it's such a tough environment that, going into that, you absolutely need to be so aware of, where the weakest link was. That weakest link in Rio was me, because I wanted it too much. And my behaviors then stretched into the others' behaviors, and we became a nervous team. And okay, maybe it's, there was more than me, and obviously there was, and stuff like that. But that's how I see it to this day, that it was my fault that we didn't win a medal that day. And my fault that we, the rigors of team competition, we weren't strong enough to be able to hold the pressure, or to hold, that wanting to do it. It's you can want it too much. And if you do want it too much, you forget about other things, and it's, it just doesn't it doesn't come on a plate. And, it's not our divine right to get the medal. It's nobody's divine right to get the medal. So the processes you put in place have to be so strong.
Stephen, I have something else I was going to ask you there, but just on the back of that, because we talked about the relays quite a bit there in that conversation in general. And I know often when we're talking to coaches who coach in a team sport, or coaches who coach in an individual sport, and you're essentially coaching a team within an individual sport. How did you find that?
Unbelievably hard, and it's one of the things that I would have to say is, the biggest challenge that we've got is that how do we, in any of the relay squads, you bring 4 individual athletes, well, really 6 individual athletes, or sometimes more, into an environment where they're scrambling themselves for individual success. And the relays are, ordinarily at the end of an event. So we have to create a program where, all these guys and women have their own personal coaches as well, so they're with them all the time. So again, how do you create that environment and culture within that team element of our sport that doesn't come natural? Very, very hard. And again, that awareness, decision making, the ability to make decisions, and it's one of the things that I would say is what we have to create, and what we've tried to create, is a group of athletes who make really good decisions, and to develop that awareness and that ability. If you think about it, if you just look at the men's team, for example, we're looking for 4 guys to go out onto the track that has to spot a 6-inch mark, to accelerate off, and to exchange a baton, which is now within a 30-meter zone, but at that stage in a 20-meter zone at full speed, so at 11.5 meters a second. That's incredibly difficult. Incredibly difficult when they've been scrambling all year for, individual performances, and, they have to try and beat each other to try and get on the team to start off with, and things like that. So it's credit to the guys, credit to the girls, and that's the big thing. To me, what I see my job is to create an environment where they're able to make good decisions, solution focused in everything that they think of. Because again, if you think of last year, for example, Zarnell tweaked his hamstring just maybe 10 meters before he got to Richard. And Richard had to be aware enough that Zarnell had, his acceleration had dropped off a little bit. And I don't think there was a call or anything like that. But the awareness of Richard for Zarnell coming in to make that change, that's what we have to try and facilitate. That's the kind of environment that we have to try and create. But that's why we have to try and focus on, develop the athletes so they're the best decision makers. What's needed at the end of the day, they have to go out in front of 90,000 people and be able to, to be able to perform. It's not me, it's not our technical leads and Benke and people like that. You know, it's not Nick in the 4x4. These guys have to be unbelievable decision makers. And again, you know, credit to the team last year, credit to, you know, the women's team, for example. 5 minutes before the call room, when they were due in for their event, Amani tweaked her hamstring. We had to make a change straight away. And we had to put, you know, Dina, I had a chat with Dina straight into leg 2, never practiced before. Asha came back into the team. Darryl went to 4. Without any chance to practice those things, yet you had to understand that, or they had to understand that the work that they had done over the last 3 years was going to, you know, was going to be robust enough and cement things. And they ran the second fastest time ever by a British quartet, you know, and grabbed a world silver medal. So that's what you're having to cultivate. You know, the team aspect is something. Curious coach, you know, you're probably going to ask me what's curious at the moment is that. You know, I listened to Michael's interview and I read a lot, and I'm very, very interested in around culture and environment and how teams survive and how to get there. So, you know, that's the biggest one. How do you make a team out of 4 individuals, you know, who scramble for funding, scramble for podium places, and ultimately, given the standard that we've got, you know, they scramble for individual podium places, hopefully at an Olympic Games as well. It's a big ask. Enjoyable, but that's why I've got white hair as well.
No, you're taking the questions out of my mouth here as we go. So no, definitely that was where we're going there, around your curiosity. So it's quite interesting for us. I know Michael and I both coach within team sports, so this is particularly interesting for us chatting through with an individual coach. But it's back to that team aspect. Is there anything you would pick out as if you maybe other coaches working with individual sports were listening around creating that team culture, you would pick out as one thing that has really made a difference for you?
When I realized that one person couldn't do it, when I realized that even if you're an individual coach, it's impossible, I think, from a performance perspective, to develop an athlete to the very, very top of their ability, which, you know, is either Olympic, world, and the level that I'm working at, luckily. I think it's impossible for one person. It's about a team approach as well. So it's about a team of coaches, whether that's, you know, in the relay end of things, you know, Christian's been involved, Benke's the technical lead, but we have someone looking after logistics, we have designated medical people. All those people have to come together as a team to support that one individual. But then realizing that for however we do it, we have to create that culture that the athlete themselves then runs with it. So they're aware, they buy in, and then what they replicate on the field of play is exactly what you want without having to think about. So decision making becomes subconscious, you know, that when it's forced. And I think that's where we were in Rio as well. You were still at the early stages of the program, so we were forcing things without really having tried them out. So, for example, if you turned up at a GB practice now, you know, with men or women, you know, it would scare the life out of you, just the intensity of training. So practice has to be, you know, we always use a sort of, you know, again, a cliche term. There's no such thing as a throwaway session. There's no such thing now as, you know, anything that we do is at top speed. There's no sub-max speed or anything like that, because it doesn't replicate what was done on the pitch. And that's what I would say, you know, would be my advice, is that I think one of my greatest skills is surrounding myself with good people, and then it makes me look decent, you know. So, but it's trying to bring the right people with you to create that environment. Jen Savage, our psychologist, is amazing. You know, she's been able to help create that culture and environment that the athletes are challenged in, but they're also comfortable in as well.
And just on that, Stephen, because one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was the culture and environment. So if I was an athlete in your training camp or as part of one of your programs, what would I see, what would I hear, what would I feel if I walked in to that environment?
You would find it relaxed. The training camp would be relaxed. It's interesting. It's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about as well and trying to rehearse. I'm going to go off on a tiny wee bit of a tangent, but within athletics, we would have, for example, we would have their own training venue. We would then have training camps throughout the year. Then we would have a holding camp, which would be pre the major competition, where we'd be refining our skills. and then we would have the warm-up area where we're preparing. To me, it's 4 completely different environments as well. So, you know, the training, their own individual environment, for example, would be similar to the training camp. But what you would see there would be a very clear, concise, sort of deliberate practice. You know, a training camp before Christmas time or in January, you would see a little bit more, you know, be a bit of crack and stuff like that, you know. But when the athletes are actually, you know, training, it's very, very clear, outcome focused. You would see much more conversation with the coaches and the athletes, and a much more technical feedback. As you go into a holding camp scenario where you've got, you know, so this year, you know, I'm name dropping massively here, but, you know, we were in Dubai for the holding camp before the Doha World Championships. So in Dubai, what you had seen would be around the relay end of things. When the relay guys turned up, we had our own area, we had our own environment, we had our own branding, we had our own, you know, nutrition supplies, water supplies, we had our own biomech. But again, it was just myself and the biomech and the technical lead, for example. There was nobody else around us, so it was very clear. The outcomes were very clear. What you would have seen at that stage would be a lot of clarity of instruction and a real encouragement for me, and an environment for me where you'd be asking, you know, you would be problem solving with the athletes. You know, you'd like to think that things weren't going wrong, but they themselves, you know, you would look at them and say that they control the session, which is exactly what we want. You know, we want to just give them the roadmap, and they control it. They control their speeds. They control everything like that. Back in then to the, you know, the warm-up area before a major competition is, you know, our biggest job there is to keep things calm. Our biggest job there is to absolutely stick to time, give the athletes the freedom and the awareness to be able to, again, come to terms with expectation is a big one, obviously, you know, because we've got into a situation now where, you know, people expect us to win and medal and things like that, which is brilliant. But with that as well comes pressure. And the pressure, you know, that's managed by themselves, because if they then, you know, as we do, if they hit what we need them to hit in the training area, and you know, their practice runs are good and everything like that, then job's done, you know. But it's calmness, and it's that. So it's four distinct areas, 4 distinct environments, but there'll be a common philosophy running through, which is clarity, professionalism, openness as well. That, you know, somebody's not going well, or there's an issue or whatever, that we have the ability to be able to adapt sessions, adapt running orders, or even to leave someone out of a session, you know. So amalgamation of all those things.
So Stephen, one of the things we wanted to ask you about today, and you've hinted at it quite a few times actually during the conversation, was around the relationships with coaches, relationships with athletes. And I have 2 real main questions around that. And one of them, I suppose, relates back to, you talked about working with Jason from he was around 15 or so, yeah. Right? And he obviously became the fastest Paralympian on earth. How did that relationship change between you as a coach and him as the athlete over that period, or did it not?
It definitely did, yeah. At the start, it was very much I was a teacher and I was telling them what to do. And as we evolved, you know, that certainly changed. With Jason, and be the first to admit it, you know, he's a typical sprinter. Sometimes you had to drag him out by the ear in the morning to get him to train and stuff like that, you know, so he'll have a laugh at that if he listens to this. But, you know, it was an I say, you do thing at the start type thing. So it was very much teacher. But we had to very quickly get into the stage then where, you know, once we started development technique, and that it was a 2-way thing really, where, you know, I needed to develop his awareness around what he was doing, so he was able to feed back to me and I was able to relate to that awareness, if that makes sense. You know, I'm very much into, you know, being in the present and mindfulness and everything like that, and asking open questions. So we would have done a lot of that type of work, you know, and how are things feeling. So that would have been a pretty unique one. As we got to the back end of his career, then it was up to him. You know, he had to take responsibilities, and, you know, and he had to be able to make those decisions and what was needed to be done. I can remember in Beijing, for example, I don't know if it's well enough known, but before the 200 meters final in Beijing, Jason hurt his hamstring quite badly. And he was, he looked very easy in his heat. He came off the heat and I went, that was easy. And he went, no, it wasn't easy. I think he ran 21.8 or something like that. He says, it wasn't. He says, my hamstring is gone. And I says, well, you didn't look it, you know. So I got the doc and yeah, the hamstring was gone. You know, it was probably grade 1 or something like that. You know, it was nothing major, but you know, the final was that next day and he got up and he was hardly able to walk. Got to the stadium and we couldn't tell anyone. You know, we couldn't tell a being of what was going on because we didn't want any noise. I probably broke all the medical rules. I didn't let the physios go near him either. I didn't want anybody to touch it. So our warm-up consisted of walking around the track. And I remember 15 minutes before, and it was a horrible night as well. It was pouring with rain in the warm-up area. And I can remember people watching us while we weren't warming up. And or where he wasn't warming up, I didn't have much warming up to do. And about 15 minutes before he was due to go into the call room, I got him to do a few strides. And again, it was labored, you know, very labored. It was very clear that he was carrying his leg, you know. And I says, right, we're going to have to just look at you in blocks. I says, just do, you know, get into the blocks and just do one push out. And he lasted about 5-10 meters, you know. So the two of us got together and said, right, I said, this is down to you. And this is where I have to give him a ton of credit. There wouldn't have been many athletes in the world were able to do what he was doing, you know. So there was no warm-up. There was no flying runs. There was no full-speed runs and things. So he went into the call room and the last words we say, you know, we're not going to die. We're not going to die wondering, you know. And that's what he said to me. We're not going to die wondering. And he went in, and I knew that he probably had one run out of him, you know. And blinking hell, you know, it was a false start, you know. And I thought, oh, we're done, you know. But you look at the mental capacity they had, and look whatever. He settled in the blocks, and he got totally into the zone. And he broke the Paralympic record in the 200 meters with a grade 1 hamstring strain, you know, and wasn't able to warm up. So again, you know, you would go back and that, you know, that wasn't a decision and that wasn't something that happened in that warm-up area at that given time. That was years of nurturing, development, his mental strength, and for him to be able to take it on that next level. So yeah, that was a big one, you know. I think sometimes as coaches we underestimate and sometimes we worry a wee bit too much about athletes. They'll figure it out, you know. You know, they'll figure it out. These guys and women are so talented that, you know, they'll find a way how to get around it. You know, they're unique. They're freaks of nature, the people at that level, and you know, their ability to be able to problem solve is huge. Did that answer the question? I can't even remember now.
Oh no, it definitely did. We talked about I suppose the transition and the change.
So that sort of ultimately he had to take responsibility, and that's how it changed. You know, there was no way it was I going to, you know, I had, you know, that was down to him then at that stage.
No, brilliant. I haven't heard that story at all before. So you've kept that tight-lipped since 2008. So
yeah.
on the other extreme, Stephen, you know, you'd worked with Jason from a very young age. You knew him well. You came through the system. Then in your role, particularly I suppose with the British team, you're going into an environment where you've got sort of stars of world athletics, you know, people of real high profile. How does that change in terms of how you manage those relationships or work within those relationships as a coach? What changes about the approach?
Do you know, I think my time in America with Lance and the group of athletes set me up well for that, you know, because I was used to success and I was used to an environment where, you know, if it had jumped from home, for example, into that environment, I think it would have been very, very difficult. Because nothing fazed me around, you know, the times that they were running and things like that meant that I was able to have conversations. I think being from where I'm from, where we're from, I was able to say, listen, you need to help me and understand here. I was very open as I am. You know, I try not to be, I'm definitely not judgmental. So I was very curious to what what made it work. And, you know, for whatever reasons, you know, British athletics at that stage had a series of, you know, it was all very common for the baton to hit the ground, and I was getting slagged off, and, you know, how can you turn this around and things like that. But I think it was, you know, my own sort of learning and my own awareness that these people are so special. The athletes are so special that they'll figure it out. And it took me a wee bit of time and things like that, and it was tough at the start because, again, you know, you're coached with a governing body. The first thing, you know, we have all personal coaches, and we have some big named, you know, personal coaches within British athletics who I wouldn't have attained anywhere near the success they would have as an athlete and stuff like that. So, you know, there would have been judgments meant or whatever, but I think you have to, you know, you have to try and gain respect as well for trying to do the right things. Not everything was right, and still not everything will be right, but you know, I think it's, you know, you're bringing in, like your podcast, that curiousness, and I am very curious as a coach, very curious how people work, very curious of how a system works. And you know, one of the things I throw out all the time, you know, there's no such thing as a perfect technique. You know, that technique has to be held by that person, you know. So if you look at, you know, men's sprints, for example, you know, you've got Coleman and Adam from us and Zarnell and, you know, Reece Prescott and people like that, all completely different. You know, their personal coaches are working to the attributes of those athletes. What we have to do then within the relay end is try to marry all that up and understand, you know, and try to marry up that, probably most of all, the psychology of it, and trying to get them to work with the team. So Simon, it's about listening, understanding, being prepared to take a bit of a bollocking at some stage, and that you're interfering and whatever. You know, there was always, still is, very contentious, you know, that I would be accused, for example, of favouring relays over individuals. Not by any stretch. But what I'd be very conscious of that within the British athletics team and environment, that throughout 4x1s and 4x4s, there's athletes there who should be getting Olympic medals all the time. And it's up to me, and it's up to others like me and my colleagues to be able to create the environment for that to work. I think, you know, when you're not trying to, I was never going to be in a position where I was going to, you know, it's one of the big bits that I miss, for example, is that personal coaching. But I'm lucky to be involved in the team aspect. I would still love to be coaching in a personal end of things, but you know, my career has taken me in another sort of direction. But when you're sort of head coach of a program, knowing that you're there to help rather than to steal or take people away, you know, you can challenge, okay, and you know, you can ask the right questions and stuff like that. But it's trying to create that environment of openness and transparency. For example, I don't care, you know, what's said to me or whatever. I have a funny story for you. So, you know, Delano Williams, one of the GB athletes, he's a 400 meter runner. Delano, when I came into the program, thought my name was Maguire, and he called me Maguire in front of everyone. You know, he didn't call me Stephen. You know, he thought my Christian name was Maguire, which was cool for me. I didn't mind, you know. But I remember one of the other coaches, you know, saying to me, "You can't let him do that. You know, you can't let him do that. That's disrespectful." You know. And until he said it at a coaching meeting, one of the other athletes said, "His name's Stephen, not Maguire." And he looked at me and he went, "No, you're Maguire." It stuck, you know. So most of them just call me Maguire now, you know. So I'm cool with whatever it is. I think what we have to do is to create an environment where you've got that honesty and openness and trust that you're able to do stuff.
Brilliant. Well, I just want to squeeze one last question in before Michael does, because I think you've definitely been taking a very critical look across some of your coaching, and clearly very reflective on every experience you've had, positive and negative. Is there one thing that stands out for you from all that time of coaching that stands out as a real highlight?
I probably would have to say the success that Jason had is definitely a highlight, but you can't get away from what, you know, the men's 4x1 team did in London as well, you know, and that. And, you know, I was lucky that, you know, myself and Christian and Benke very much, you know, created an environment and a culture that these guys were able to go out and in a home track. It's funny, you know, Neil Black, you know, things weren't going that well. Mo got a medal, I think, to start off with, and then we had loads of fifths and fourths and whatever. And I laughed, I said, it's all going to come down to the relays, and he says it is. And for the life of me, I didn't think that the 4 relay teams would all medal at a world championship. It was never done. So with Jason's success and working with a young athlete, but that night when the men won the 4x1, it was just this massive relief. And it's similar when Jason won his first Paralympic gold medal, the double in Beijing. One of the journalists, CNN, I think, CNN guy brought us down to the silk market, and I started talking about, and Jason and I started talking about, London, or what was going to come next, or Rio, sorry, at that stage, rather than, Beijing, it was London, yeah. And he says, I don't want to know about what's in the future, I want to know what's now. London was the same for us when we won 2017. The first thing I thought was, right, how are we going to retain it in 2019? How are we going to win the Olympic title in 2020? But it's that, it's that knowing that it can be done now, and knowing that the tools are there, knowing that the processes are there, that, going into, next year now, hopefully that can be replicated with an Olympic title as well. But those two things, working with Jason definitely, and that night and that whole period when 4 relay teams came in with the medals was quite exciting. There was a fair, come back home, there's a fair bit of relief there,
Stephen, we've asked you quite a few questions this afternoon. I want to ask you
that all day if you want.
Yeah, I know you would. We have to turn the camera off, and we can talk all afternoon. Actually, we've asked you lots of questions. I want to ask you one more.
Uh-huh.
Is there anything that we haven't asked you today that you think will be useful for the coaches who are listening to the podcast?
People to reflect to, whether you call it mentors or whatever. I've been extremely lucky that I've had Patsy McGonigal, I've had Maeve Kyle, I've had Stuart Hogg, I've had numerous people, I'll probably forget people, is that I've always reflected back to those people to keep me right. I don't think it's possible to do it on your own, I think, as you say, but you need a very smart person that you can reflect to give you a good kicking at times if you've got it wrong, or you get too arrogant, or you think you're there, or whatever. Even to this day, I surround myself with people that I'll run all my stuff past and stuff. So that would be my advice. Get someone that you can talk to, that you can be honest with, and the person themselves isn't afraid to give you an honest feedback that at times might hurt.
Fantastic. Listen, we want to thank you for your time this afternoon. It's amazing to have another Northwest man on the podcast as well. First one.
Where everything happens, does it not?
Absolutely. Best part of the world. Listen, for me, and I'm sure Simon will echo this, a really authentic and honest account of your coaching, and it was just fantastic to hear your story and hear some of your insights into how you've developed as a coach and all the processes behind that. And genuinely just want to thank you again for taking the time to talk with us this afternoon. I did say to Simon beforehand we would have no problem filling the time, because Stephen is a fantastic communicator, loves stories. He'll talk us through. You and I have had these conversations down the years. This is the first time we've pressed record on them. So,
No, anytime. I've loved it, and it sounds cliched and everything like that, but I think, we have a job to do as well when, I've been lucky, I've been given tremendous opportunities. So, at any stage, anybody wants to chat, just feel free.
Fantastic.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steve. So, Michael, we've had a fellow Northwest coach on the line today. How did you find that?
Yeah, it was, all the best coaches come from that part of the world, don't you? It was amazing, absolutely fantastic. I think Stephen just gives a really honest, authentic account of his coaching experiences, his journey towards the highest level in athletics. And the thing that really stuck out for me was that the fact he was so open and so reflective about times when things maybe didn't go so well. And it's really refreshing to see a coach at such a high level be so open and honest in that sense. He talked about reflecting on, when results didn't go his way or the team's way at the Olympics, and you could really tell that he had spent a lot of time reflecting, a lot of time thinking about that, really looking at how things could have been improved. And then he talked a little bit about how he had implemented changes to make sure that actually anything that had went wrong before could be resolved, and afforded him another opportunity to learn really through just that deep reflection. What about you? How did you find that conversation?
Yeah, I find Stephen absolutely fascinating, Michael. I think for me, it's hard to look past the part of the conversation you've just described around the Rio relay team. And I've had conversations with coaches who have been as open as that before, but not in a public forum, in a private forum. And I just found that just unbelievable that he was happy to share that with whoever listens in on this podcast. Thought he brought a real level of humility as well, and just really, really seeking about how he could do things better again in the future. And he's such a great guy to have a conversation with. But I knew it would be a good conversation. But that segment in particular, it took it well beyond my expectations.
Absolutely, and the first time we've had someone on from although he works with relay teams, an individual sport in athletics.
Yeah, definitely, and I suppose that was another interesting point around. He had such an emphasis around the team, whether it was coaching relay teams within the individual sport, or his point around individuals and their, I suppose, the team of people even around an individual within a sport, in terms of the multidisciplinary teams that tend to be in high performance sport. As you know, that bit in particular is a real interest of mine. So that was another part of the conversation that definitely stood out.
Absolutely. Anyone who's been listening, I really hope you've been enjoying the Curious Coaching podcast so far. This has been our third episode. We're going to continue to bring you episodes monthly with fantastic coaches, and hopefully, as I say, every week you can take something away that either makes you curious about your own coaching or something you'd like to learn, or gives you some nuggets of information that you can use in your own coaching practice. From Simon and myself, have a great time until we hear from us again, and we will catch you soon on the next episode.
Curious Coaching is brought to you by Sport Northern Ireland. We hope that this episode has sparked some curiosity for you and your coaching. The future belongs to the curious.